Hello and welcome. In this video today, I am going to show you the 12 easiest watercolor flowers to paint. Anyone can paint these and you can paint them right now. I promise. I'm going to break it down into very simple shapes and steps. I have 12 squares I have sectioned off on my paper. You do not have to do that, but we are going to start with the rose. So with the tip of my brush and a very highly concentrated pigment of wash, I am just making some tiny circles around each other for the center of the rose. And then I'm making these really thin moon shapes around the outside of that center that we created. And I'm making sure they're staggered and alternating on top of each other. Then I just rinse my brush a little bit so there's still pigment on the brush and make more moon shapes on the outside. This gives the illusion that it's, darker and more folded in with more petals on the inside because that's where the pigment is. And then the petals are opening up and are lighter on the outside. And that's it. That's the rose. I feel like it's pretty straightforward and simple. It might take a second for you to be able to get those moon shapes layered in the right way that looks good to you, but it's a lot more straightforward than it might seem. And then you can add a pretty little jagged edged leaf on the side of your rose too. So this next one is really fun. This is kind of like a forget-me-not flower, but you could really do this in any color. But the top layer of petals is an M. So you'll see I'm painting an M on the top. And then the bottom layer of petals is a W. So you can play around with the M and the W being different shapes, different heights, different thicknesses. Maybe they connect on one side or on both sides, but really breaking it down into those letters will help you know how to create all the right bumps to make it look like a really pretty flower. And again, like I said, this is more of a forget-me-not style, but you could paint this in pink and it would be a really cute little flower. I also want to show you how I clean things up when the bleed is too much, because I don't want too much green to bleed into my blue flower. And so I rinse my brush, I dry it, and with a dry brush, I remove the green from the blue, and then I just go back in and add more blue. So that's how you can fix, some of your bleeds when they get out of control. But I am just doing some really light strokes, really small, simple strokes that give the illusion of everything connecting, but not everything has to connect, especially in this loose style. And then a bright pop of yellow once those petals have dried mostly makes this look like a beautiful forget-me-not flower. Over on my Instagram page, there have been a couple of videos that have been really popular lately where I've simplified flowers, which gave me the idea to do this full-fledged video on all the flowers you can simplify. But this is one of them that people really loved. It's really simple. It's just you're starting out with 4 kind of rounded triangles in this pattern across from each other, and then you let it dry completely, and then you layer 4 more rounded triangles on the opposite sides. So you do a light enough wash that you can see each petal as its own distinct petal, but that when they are layered over each other, you can see that beautiful layering technique when it's all dry. And then once the petals are all dry, you can add the center, and you can make it as simple or as fancy as you want it to be. You can leave it with just the yellow in the center. I added a little bit of darkness around the sides for more contrast and some simple leaves. For this next flower, I'm using a yellowish orange color to load my brush with a medium wash, and then I'm just doing some bright red on the very tip of the brush and pressing down on the paper with the tip of my brush leading, and I'm using the shape of my brush to create the flower itself. Now you could use the same technique to make 5 petals around a center. That would be really pretty, but for this one I'm just showing you how you can do kind of an individual bud type flower. I'm thinking like when you see a wreath or a bouquet and there's little sprigs of flowers or berries, this would be the perfect technique to achieve that look. And for the greenery, I'm doing light, simple, short strokes with just the tip of my brush. I feel like when I keep everything really light and loose, I'm much more pleased with how it looks, especially when it comes to greenery. So that's just my biggest tip if you want it to be not necessarily abstract, but it leaves more of an illusion that your eye carries on versus being totally exact. Next, we're going to simplify a peony. So we're going to start with two major petals in the front, and they're kind of rounded triangles. And then we're going to do two swipes on the side. Remember that all of these little swipes and shapes need to come to a point towards one center point where the stem is. Then we're going to make two little mountains, little bumpy wiggles across the top. And that's it. You could leave it like that, and that looks like a peony. I'm kind of zhuzhing up the sides a little bit because these little swipey parts are petals that we're looking at from the side. And then you can layer in more petals. Some peonies have petals that are kind of falling off the sides. And so it's pretty common to paint these petals, these fluffy petals on the sides. And then I'm just doing very simple greenery. I didn't add any leaves for this one. And then while it is still wet, I went in and added some of the yellow for the center and let it bleed up into those back petals. Now I'm going to show you how to paint a lavender type flower, and again, you could totally switch up the colors of this one and it would be a different kind of flower. So you're going to make these little squiggle marks, kind of 3 little marks real quick, and you'll have thicker and more flowers along the bottom, and you're going to taper off into a cone as you get higher. So they'll be smaller and farther apart and in that cone shape as you get higher up into your lavender shape. And I started with a light purple, and now I'm going in with a dark purple and adding more shapes and letting everything bleed and blend, adding more volume along the bottom as well. Funny enough, my lavender tutorial that I painted for the 30 days of watercolor flowers back in November is my most popular video on YouTube, so go figure, lavender's awesome. And then I did a dark green for the greenery in the lavender, making sure to add a lot of little tiny strokes to connect all of the little lavender branches. I did some greenery above where the top of the lavender ended, just to make it look like, new growth, new buds that would be coming off the lavender, some tiny little leaves on the side, and it was done. So this flower has gone absolutely viral on my Instagram account, and it's just magical how it works. I think that's why everyone loves it. If you have found me because of this flower, please let me know in the comments and tell me why you love this flower, because it is awesome. You just start with 5 concentrated dots, you rinse your brush, and you pull the pigment out into triangle shapes. It's pretty foolproof. Anybody can do this, and it is beautiful. It has such a beautiful result, and I love doing a light pale pink with this flower. And there's so many ways you could change this up too. You could obviously do different colors, but you could try doing more dots, less dots. You could do longer strokes to pull the pigment out. Really such a fun idea, and I would love to know if you play around with this one. I added very simple leaves, really just using the shape of the brush to create the leaves here. And then I used the 2-stroke method to create a leaf with 2 strokes, leaving a center of white for the vein of the leaf. And to finish off the flower, I'm adding a nice bright pop of yellow that contrasts really well against that bright pink. So this next flower is one of my go-to filler flowers. And it's kind of like the M and W shapes we were doing before, but it's more like an N with a swipe. And it's just the top layer, so it's just a nice pretty flower that's pointed upward, and really, again, any color. I usually do this in a yellow or a red color, and it makes the perfect filler in any bouquet, any kind of wreath. And it doesn't have to look like any flower you've ever seen before. It's just a really easy, effective, beautiful flower. This next one is a daisy or a sunflower type flower, and I'm starting with the center. I'm putting in a very rough center in a kind of medium to highly pigmented wash, and then just tapping in the petals against the center so that it blends and bleeds in while pulling the petals outward. So the petal shape will depend on the shape of your brush. You could really use any round brush for this effect, and you're going to want to do this quickly so that it does continue to have that blending effect from the center up into the flower. This would be really pretty with a bright yellow center and pink flowers. You could really do any kind of thing with this technique, and then I'm just adding some darkness for contrast in the center of the flower, and that's it. This next flower is like a bachelor's button type flower, so I'm just making really thin strokes, all coming towards a single point. So remember that flowers are like a cone, so every stroke we make needs to be coming towards the center to the point of our cone. So some of my strokes got really wild there. I'm just thinking about wild organic flowers, but they're all coming to meet together at a center point, and then I'm creating this really rough and loose ball type stamen right at the base of those petals, and then a really simple stem and a longer leaf, and that one is finished. So this next flower is just 3 simple strokes all bunched together, and they don't even have to be distinctly 3 strokes. If they kind of blend together as you're doing them, that's perfect. And that makes 1 petal. And then you can do 5 petals, and this is representative of a cosmos type flower, but that beautiful texture on the end of the flower, and it's such an easy way to create that look. And then they have bright, beautiful yellow centers, and then very simple greenery. They do have really beautiful textured leaves, so I did 2 different versions of simple ways you can achieve that textured greenery look, and then this one is done. So I have saved the easiest flower for last, but it is not the least. It is such a beautiful and effective, easy flower to paint. So it's pretty much like the 5 dots we painted from that viral one a couple of flowers ago, except now we are not spreading the pigment out into big petals, but we are letting these dots be the petals. So the dots are going to be a little bit elongated, so it looks like little tiny daisies. I'm keeping the centers really open so that the centers will be kind of the main feature of this flower, with really small spread apart petals for the flower. And you can really play around with this idea with flowers pointing in different directions and the centers pointed up to the sky in different ways. And then I'm keeping the greenery really simple and light. Each of the flowers has their own stem because I'm imagining this as more of like little tiny wildflower daisies in a field. And then really simple leaves that are added as well. I'm using a bright yellow for the centers to contrast against the pink, but I'm just imagining that a yellow flower with a black center, kind of like a black-eyed Susan, would be gorgeous as well. And that is it. 12 very easy watercolor flowers that you can totally paint right now. And I hope that by breaking it down into the shapes, it does feel more achievable for you. And I will see you all next time. Bye.